Chapter 9 of Kidnap on the California Comet by M.G. Lenmont and Sam Sedgman. I'm going to go back to the beginning of the chapter because we haven't read any of this since before Christmas, so I think it would help us all if we had a bit of a recap. So to begin with, it will sound familiar, but it's just a couple of pages and then we'll be into it, okay? Chapter 9, Razor's Rocket. As the California Comet rumbled out of Iowa and into the state of Nebraska, Hal turned from Uncle Nat and Zola's dinner conversation to watch the big orange sun set into the Missouri River. It looks like it's having a dip, he thought. Omaha Station was on the east side of the city, nestled between buildings. On the far side of the tracks, a pathway marked with lanterns stretched across the dusty ground towards a grand building illuminated by spotlights. "That's the Durham Museum," Uncle Nat said, looking over his shoulder, "where the press conference will be." Zola got up from the table. "August said the conference will be in 2 parts. Drinks in the museum for the big announcement, and then we will all have to look at old trains," she mimed, yawning. "Afterwards, in the Silver Scout, he says he's going to show us something revolutionary." She lowered her voice. "Bet it's the rocket." After nipping back to the roomette to get their coats, Hal and Uncle Nat joined the rest of the invited journalists who were gathered on the platform. "This way, everyone, please," chirruped an enthusiastic woman with bouncy hair, waving a clipboard, shepherding them along the platform to the back of the train. Passengers looked down at them from the train windows. Hal spotted Mason and Hadley waving madly, and he saluted back, feeling very grown up. Following the group around the corrugated curve of the Silver Scout, Hal saw that boards had been laid over the rails. They were led across the tracks to the lantern-lit path. "Omaha was the start of the first transcontinental railroad," Uncle Nat said. "Once this was one of the busiest stations in the country." He sighed. "Now this beautiful station is a museum." "Then what are these tracks used for?" Hal pointed to the rails. "Freight trains mostly, and the California Comet stop is over there, but Omaha Station is a shadow of what it used to be. I would have loved to have seen it in its heyday." Freight trains are trains that carry goods rather than people, and a heyday means when it was at its peak, when it was doing best. They entered the museum through a back door, passing an exhibition space containing an old black train carriage and arriving in an enormous hall to the sound of a string quartet. That means 4 instruments that are all string instruments like violins, cellos. "It looks like Union Station," Hal said, staring at the ornate ceiling. "It is Union Station." "Or was," Uncle Nat said. "Union Pacific are one of the largest railway companies in America. Their headquarters are in Omaha. This was the first and grandest of the stations they built. 8 different railway companies came to use it. It's the heart of America's railways, old and new." "Are you sure this press conference is going to be about a rocket?" Hal asked, looking around. "Everything here is about trains." The hall was buzzing. Television cameras and microphones were dotted about. Several people came up to Uncle Nat and shook his hand. Hal smiled politely and nodded when he was introduced, but he was itching to go and see the old American locomotives. A hush spread through the crowd as August Razor made his way to a podium. A rush of applause greeted him, and Hal moved to get a clear view. "Thank you for being here today." Razor clasped the podium and surveyed the room with an energetic grin. Behind him stood Marianne in a bright yellow dress, looking bored. "Today we stand on the brink of a revolution. The climate is changing, and we, as the most adaptable species on Earth, will change with it. 200 years ago, a man called Robert Stephenson made a machine that changed the world. Stephenson's rocket was the most advanced and practical steam engine of its day. Its whistle heralded the Industrial Revolution. Today, here, now, I'm announcing a competition." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "A competition to find the most innovative prototype of a clean energy locomotive and rail system as revolutionary as Stephenson's rocket. A prototype means the first one. Entries are open to anyone, anywhere in the world. He looked down the barrel of a nearby camera. Do you think you could design Razor's rocket? The train to take us into the future? The murmur built to a buzz. Told you it would be about trains, Hal whispered excitedly to Uncle Nat. I have bought land for a high-speed rail route linking Washington, Philadelphia, New York and Boston. Several cameras flashed. Hal pulled out his sketchbook and drew Razor behind his podium and a fast outline of Marianne. Strappy sandals, hands at her sides, head tipped up, staring at the ceiling. I think that must be the drawing that Hal did in his sketchbook, don't you? He's a brilliant artist. Oh, here's where we got up to in class, look. I'm committing 20% of my company's annual profits to this enterprise, as well as our newest technology, the Razor Solar Storage Battery. It's the smallest, most powerful solar energy storage battery ever invented. I'll be showing it to you later. More camera flashes and some hands went up. Without the need to pay for fuel, we'll be able to offer high-speed travel at an affordable price. He raised his hands. Oh, and I almost forgot. The prize for the competition winner is $1 billion. Hal gasped and the room erupted. People were calling out August Razor's name and waving to ask questions. Uncle Nat surged forward with the other journalists. Watching the back and forth of questions and answers about batteries and business, Hal lost interest in the press conference. Looking at the big doors leading into the museum, he decided it would be nice to see the trains alone, without the crowd. He crossed the room and pushed the door open. On the other side was a hall with railway tracks set into the floor. Sitting on the rails were beautiful old carriages. Hal was drawn to them. It was quiet in there. Passing two sunny yellow carriages with Union Pacific painted in red, he saw that one had Pullman spelled out on the side and smiled. It was comforting to be so far from home, yet see something familiar. A forest green carriage at the end of the platform looked like the grand ones on the Highland Falcon. The wooden bench opposite felt like an invitation to draw. He sat down, flicked to a clean page in his sketchbook, and, without looking down, he captured the refined lines of the carriage. He lovingly recorded the rounded edges and raised edge of the roof, remembering the time he'd scrambled across a similar roof on a moving train. Glancing down at his drawing, Hal cried out. White grooves were scored into the page, ruining his picture. He would have to start again on a new page. He remembered Ryan pressing the pencil hard as he drew and wondered angrily how many pages were ruined. He ran his finger over the grooves. There's a pattern to the lines, he thought. Quickly, he brushed the flat edge of his pencil point across the paper, shading over the indentations. A word appeared. Help! Hal's heart jumped. He flipped back to the drawing of the dining car. There was Seymour Hart, and played through the scene in his head. Ryan had drawn the lines, passed the book back to him, and then mimed Marianne Razor's name. Help! Marianne Razor. A chill shook him. He heard the distant sound of applause and snapped his book shut, leaping up and rushing back to the hall. There you are! Uncle Nat clapped a hand on his shoulder, but his expression became concerned when he saw Hal's face. Are you all right? Where's Marianne? Hal looked through the crowd to the stage. She'd gone. She's with her father, Uncle Nat said. What on earth's the matter? I think Marianne's in danger, Hal said, wondering how to explain Ryan's strange message without it sounding like a silly game. Can we go outside? Uncle Nat nodded, and they moved through the crowd, out of the museum and onto the lantern-lit path. The sky above the Silver Scout was the colour of a purple bruise. It would soon be dark. Marianne told me that there are people after her. And you believe her? Uncle Nat asked, looking worried. Well, Hal thought about how oddly Marianne behaved. He didn't trust her entirely, but Ryan's message couldn't be ignored. There have been some strange things happening on the train. Marianne has a personal bodyguard, Uncle Nat said, trying to reassure him. I'm sure she's quite safe. I know, but I've got this horrible feeling. Hal's hand went to his chest. How can I help? Uncle Nat asked in earnest. I need to go back to the train and ask someone some questions before I can be certain, Hal said, thinking of Ryan. Would you find Marianne and keep an eye on her for me? I know she has Woody, but I'd feel better if you were watching her too. Well, look, there's the message, look, that Hal found in his sketchbook when he shaded over the dents in the paper that Ryan had made by going over the lines in the drawing on the other page. Help. He didn't tell his uncle that Marianne had sneaked away from Woody once already. Of course, Uncle Nat nodded. Razor's presentation about the solar battery is happening in the Silver Scout. She's probably in there. I'm sure no one will mind if I skip the museum tour and show up early. I'll bet that's what Zola's done. But you mustn't worry, Hal. Marianne is quite safe. Thanks, Hal said with a grateful smile. I'll come and find you when I'm done. He ran across the boards, round the Silver Scout and stepped up onto the platform. He had no idea where on the train Ryan and Jean were seated, but he'd seen them go into coach, and so he boarded the train there and worked his way through the carriage, then the sightseer lounge and the dining car, scanning the passengers. There was no sign of them. Realising they might be in a bedroom or a roomette, he knocked on each and every door, asking for Ryan. Eventually, he arrived at Mason and Hadley's compartment. Mason opened the door wearing a false moustache. Hey, what was the museum like? Hadley was wearing her rainbow sequin jacket. What's up? Hal held up his sketchbook. Look! Help? What does that mean? Hadley asked. Ryan made these marks through the page with my pencil. It's an invisible message. I only saw it when I tried to draw over it. Hal looked from Hadley to Mason. He was trying to tell me that Marianne Razor is in danger. He was saying, help. He pointed at the page and then did the actions. Marianne Razor. Wow. Mason sat down, peeling off the moustache. What kind of danger? I don't know. Seymour Hart's in this picture, so he could have something to do with it, but he might not. Hal's pulse was racing. I've looked everywhere for Ryan. I need to know what he meant, but I don't know if he's in a roomette or... He's next door, Hadley said. What? Ryan and his mean dad are in the bedroom next door, Mason nodded. We saw them come out for dinner. Hal dashed into the corridor and banged on their door. There was no answer. Where's Marianne now? Asked Hadley from the doorway. In the Silver Scout. My uncle's keeping an eye on her. If you can't find Ryan, maybe we should go talk to her? And tell her what? That she's in danger? Mason asked. She's the one who told that to us. Yeah, well... Hadley pulled off her jacket and grabbed a cardigan. I'd want to know about Ryan's message. Wouldn't you? Let's go, Hal said. The three of them burst out onto the platform, their dirty yellow glow dimly reflected by the Comet's carriages. As they approached the Silver Scout, Hal saw Zola stepping out onto the platform. He opened his mouth to call out to her, but before he could, a high-pitched scream cut through the night. Hal exploded forward, sprinting past the corner of the station building. He saw a figure in a yellow dress, struggling, being dragged backwards by a hooded figure. Marianne! Hal shouted. She was thrashing about, her blonde hair flying. The dark figure bundled her into the boot of a car, slamming it shut and muting her screams. Stop! Hal shouted as he raced towards the car. Zola was running too, impressively fast in her high heels. Uncle Nat was suddenly there, overtaking Zola. He could hear Mason and Hadley right behind him. There was a shout from Woody. The hooded figure jumped into the driver's seat. The engine was already running. The tyres squealed and the car lurched away from them into the night. Oh, my goodness me.